to have someone who's on the acknowledgments page of my book, and someone who I've had the benefit of attending teachings, and who I know is qualified to give advice here, and really just, he brings so much experience to the table. I'm with Lama, Tsultrim, Yeshe. I'm going to try and pronounce this properly, from Karma, Triana, Dharma Chakra, KTD. I met the Lama in Woodstock, New York, where KTD's main monastery is based. We also taped a number of videos at that time about Buddhist tools for people in recovery. The Lama shared about his background with growing up in a traumatic environment involving family members, and how that experience now has led him on his path to becoming ordained as a Buddhist monk. He's based out of Wisconsin, although he does teach on social media, so he has followers all over the United States and beyond. And I want to thank you so much, Lama, for coming on today to share your years of wisdom with my audience at Spiritual Adrenaline.
Well, thank you, Tom. I really appreciate being able to have this interview and reach the people that you reach.
Well, we got together a couple of years ago. I think it was, time flies, 2016, 2017. So much has changed in the world since that time. But going back to that point, your background gives you, in my opinion, an excellent training, if you will, for overcoming trauma and overcoming challenges. And so for those that are out there in the addiction recovery community who watch Spiritual Adrenaline's videos, number one, can you share a little bit of your background and your training? And then number two, speak to why Buddhist tools have been so helpful to you and to the folks that you teach with and practice with.
Well, first of all, my mother was mentally ill, and she and Dad were in a codependent relationship. And so Dad wanted her mentally ill so he could take care of her. And I came to realize much later in life that I have a strong suspicion Dad had Asperger's syndrome, because I have met people that admit having it. And I see similar things. Dad was very good with numbers. And yet, the first time I hugged him, he was over 90. And he immediately withdrew from me with this horrified look on his face, because I had touched him. I had gotten into his space. And so Dad emotionally was like a rock. And Mom would go into hysterics, to say the least. And she would beat me with a leather belt. She would yell at me. She would scream at me. So there was nothing at home to give me emotional support. And as a result of that, well, I'll go back. There is a test that you can take on the internet. It's called Adverse Childhood Experiences, ACE. I know, Tom, you're familiar with this. And I scored a 4, which puts you at a much higher risk of things like depression and suicide. And when I was 14, I tried suicide because I thought I was a piece of crap, because I was being treated like a piece of crap. And then as I got a little bit older, I realized, or I felt that, well, all my problems are because of Mom. And then I started resisting her. And to the point that when I was 16, I resisted her whipping me with the belt. And so she and Dad took me to a psychiatric ward. They can do that for 5 days without legal backing. And I stayed a 6th day because it was better than at home. And then when I was 17, I stole one of the family cars and Dad's credit card, and I put on 1,500 miles or so on the car before the police stopped me and brought me back. So this was my childhood, and I didn't realize this at the time, because I thought when I left home, okay, everything's all right. But what I really had was depression. It was maybe mild at that time, but I still had a very negative outlook on myself and the world. And so now here I am, 40 years old. I'm married. I have a son that, let's see, at that time, I think he was maybe 13, 14 years old, and at 13. And my best friend died, and suddenly I had my whole world collapse. And I had severe depression to the point where sleeping as much as 16 hours a day. Now, what happened was at that point, I suddenly realized, partially through help from the psychiatrist and a very strong antidepressant, that depression sucks, that it was an absolutely terrible place to be. And it was just, I began to see that there's another way to look at things. And so then I started looking. And one thing that I realized quickly when I started reading was that depression is the mind's telling you, you might say your inner goodness, your inner wisdom telling you that this is an untenable place to be. This is not working, and just doing more of it is not going to solve the problem. And so then another book that I read almost began with, it might be on the second or third chapter, that your thoughts aren't real, that your thoughts are how you create your reality. If you don't like your reality, stop thinking what you're thinking and think about other things. And in fact, on the last page of the last chapter, it was ego is the ultimate illusion. Love is the ultimate reality. And that led me to Buddhism, believe it or not, because Buddhism teaches that ultimately we are pure and perfect, and love is the radiance of enlightened mind. And so I started paying attention to my thoughts. And I started to see something very interesting, and that was that I was constantly thinking about how bad I was, how bad the world was. I liked to listen to records, rock and roll records that talked about how bad the world was. I wanted to feed myself 24/7 input of how bad I was and how bad the world was and how much everything sucked. And very quickly, I quit listening to those records. I quit reading those books. I stopped watching these things. A person told me this, asked me this once after I became a Lama. When I see horror movies, I have nightmares. And of course, the solution is pay attention to how you're feeling and don't put that kind of food into your mind. And
More difficult than ever, by the way, due to social media, because there's a constant battering of the mind with negative um, thoughts and behaviors. I mean, from what I see, part of my recovery and addiction, and the reason I turned to Buddhism was because I wanted to end the constant bombardment of my mind with the negatives, the music, the people, the behaviors on social media, and refocus it. And that's where I found Buddhism to be so powerful. But it's such a hard thing for folks to, number one, pay attention to their thoughts, and then make the effort and actually achieve, changing them. So how do you recommend for people out there who have that monkey mind going on and paying lots of time with or spending a lot of time with negatives to really fundamentally change the behaviors?
well, the first thing is to be aware of it, and then don't be afraid of it. Um, that we think it's real, but it isn't. It is not real. It's just, to give you an idea, if it was real, if our thoughts were real, then try this. Instead of eating today, think about a wonderful feast you had some Thanksgiving. Think about it all day long. Oh, this delicious food. I'm a vegetarian, but let's go with the turkey. The turkey and the dressing were fantastic. I ate so much I was stuffed, I had to lay down. Think about that all day long and see if that satisfies your hunger. It can't. And So you have to realize that what you're thinking is a fantasy, and that if you want to change your world, start thinking positive thoughts. Start thinking about what there is to appreciate in life. And it took me a while, it took me a long time to understand mom this way. I first, as I practiced on the Buddhist path, I first started looking at her like an injured animal, like a dog that loves the family, but now it went out on the road, got hit, it's in mortal pain, and if you get close to it, you have to muzzle it or it'll bite you. And that's the way mom was. Later on, I came to realize that she behaved like a person that had been sexually assaulted as a child. And you might say, my heart opened up to that approach. And I realized that, yes, she was in continual pain emotionally. And that she was in emotional pain because of some very traumatic experiences that she had, and that she had PTSD just like I did. And then I would go through and think about all the things that she did for me that I benefited from. And then I went to forgiving her. And then the last step was at realizing I benefited her so much, even from the traumatic childhood, because it's now a resource. I like to use this phrase that if your experiences is crap, it's a real problem. And I'm using a nice word here. We all know the S word. But if we look at it as manure, it becomes a resource for growth, and we are wealthy in inner resources. And so I could go down a long list of things that she and dad did for me that I benefited from. And now there's nothing to forgive.
That's a profound shift in the thinking, which I'm sure had profound impact on your life and the direction of your life. And for me, as someone in addiction recovery, it took the really changing, you change the thought, you change the mind, and being able to let go of kind of reliving traumas and move forward and actually experience life and look back on the traumas as a learning experience and something that's in the past, not happening again in the present, was a profound moment. But when I turn the TV on now with the coronavirus and the pandemic, it's consistently a consistent message of negativity, quite frankly, for people in addiction recovery who used to go to 12-step meetings, or the recommendations were to integrate themselves into fellowship with other people. Now they're doing Zoom meetings. There's virtual communication with people. So things have radically changed. They've really radically changed, and they changed almost overnight. Addicts and alcoholics don't like change. So it was already difficult. This is difficult, and so they have to not just accept it, but embrace it at their own peril for not doing so. What Buddhist teachings or techniques do you recommend people who are struggling with this? This being the pandemic, and this being shelter in place and the isolation that comes with it. What Buddhist tools would be most useful for people to try?
Yeah, well, this is not good news for an addict, but one of the basic teachings of the Buddha is impermanence, that things change and they can change dramatically, and we don't have control over these changes, and that ultimately you need to embrace change. But getting there maybe is difficult. Um, when you look at your mind during the day, and I'm not going to say that you can do this easily, but every once in a while, if you just stop and you might say, do an assessment of where have my thoughts been the past couple of minutes, and you will realize that your mind is constantly changing. Even if you're having similar thoughts, they're all new thoughts. They're not what would I say? reruns of the same thing. They actually knew. Uh, Going back to your childhood and my childhood, what I like to tell people is that you will never be abused as a child again because you have changed. You're an adult. You might be abused as an adult, you might experience trauma as an adult, but you're never going to be that 10-year-old boy that experienced those things. Now, this is something that I think is extremely important, and that is humor. That instead of when I was growing up, everything I did wrong was a felony. There were no warnings, there were no misdemeanors. And when I was depressed, everything I did was a felony. Again, that lightening up and having some humor is incredibly important. So quit watching the news and maybe start watching comedy movies. When I realized how badly I was, you might say, beating myself up with this inner monkey mind, I hung a sign on in my kitchen on the wall, and it was just a computer printout, and it said, "The beatings will continue until morale improves," and then in small letters, "The management." And I'm living alone. People would come and visit me and they would scratch their head. And I said, "Oh, I've got a manager and he lives in this house." And it might take me a week of beating myself up when I would see that finally and then start laughing and thinking that this is the most bizarre self-help program there is out there. And so uh, I'm trying to think of the man's name. He might have done this in the 70s or 80s, that he had a diagnosis of cancer. And so what he did is he got a pile of old movies, these were the old cassette tapes, and rented a room in a hotel in New York City, and for a number of weeks just watched comedy movies. And he said it cured him of cancer. I'm not recommending doing this, but comedy can cure you of feeling cooped up, can cure you of being so hard on yourself.
And it's so much easier with Netflix and Amazon Prime Video. You can get almost any movie you want delivered to your home. You don't even need the old cassettes. And a lot of the folks watching this don't even know what a cassette is.
Right. Now, I'll give you a secret of mine. This is a Midwest comedy show that would show on the public televisions out here, but it originates in Canada. And to the best of my knowledge, these are all on YouTube, and it's called The Red Green Show. And to give you an idea, it is held at the mythical Possum Lodge. And at the end, they have a Possum Lodge meeting of men, and they have the man's prayer. And this is how it goes. "I'm a man. I can change if I want to, I guess." And
I'm going to check that out.
yeah, I watched every one. I watched every one that I could when it was on public television, and then I went back and watched all the others and rewatched some of them. That's really quite funny if you're a man and you like to laugh at the way men are.
Mhm. Well, women like to also laugh at the way men are as well, so they might find it very interesting. And you're also on YouTube. You're doing a lot of social media now on a weekly basis. Why don't we talk a little bit about what you're up to, the days of the week and the times, and everything you're doing is really free, and it's really a wonderful resource for people out there. So why don't you share a little bit about that?
Yes. Well, first of all, I have a group that's affiliated with Karma Triyana Dhamma Chakra in Woodstock, New York. That's where Tom and I met when I was doing a program there, and I will do programs there in the future. And so there's a group here where I live. I live out in the country in an old farmstead and have a separate building that the group meets in. It's called the Hay River K TC, Karma Tegsum Choling, and then I restarted one in Minneapolis. And so we very quickly went to doing Zoom teachings because of the self isolation. And so I give one on Saturday afternoon at 3 o'clock. This is Central Time. This would be 4 o'clock New York time. Got one going Sunday morning at 10:30. And this Sunday, we're going to be chanting prayers, and you have to be on our email list before you will get sent a link to where you can download these prayers. And then on Tuesday evening at 6 o'clock is a third group that I lead, and this is a book study group. And we are presently on the last chapter of a book by Tralek Rinpoche called Karma, what it is, what it isn't, and why it's important. But a week from this Tuesday, I think it's the 5th of May, we're going to start a new book by Pema Chodron, and it is The Places That Scare You. And I chose that specifically because I think there are some people that have some fear that wells up in their lives. And so this is going to be an interesting book. And then I am posting all of these on a YouTube channel, which I just started, and I'm just learning the ropes. I need to watch more tutorials about YouTube, how to do it. But I think we've got 11 or 12 different videos of my teachings on there that you can view at your leisure. And as Tom said, it's all for free.
Now we're going to show the links to all of your social media so that people they know where to go. But your YouTube channel, what's your YouTube channel?
It is Lama Tsultrim Yeshe.
Okay. Lama, thank you so much. I mean, your teachings benefited me. That's why I mentioned you in the acknowledgement page of the book, and I actually referenced some of the teachings there. And I think the Buddhist teachings from 2,500 years ago are even more appropriate today in the environment that we're living than they probably were at his time. I think they're so useful to me and to so many people in so many ways that 2,500 years ago, I'm sure he had never contemplated. So let's just leave with, maybe you can say some words of wisdom to folks out there who just don't think that they can make it through the next couple of days, weeks, or months if things continue the way they are.
Well, I think what is really important is to be able to have contact with somebody. Call up somebody. Don't spend so much time on Facebook and other social media. Actually, call up somebody and talk to them and be able to explain how you're feeling and so forth. That in New York, this is maybe harder to do, but nature can be very soothing. And just getting out of the house can help you get away from that claustrophobic feeling, even if you're standing on the sidewalk alone. And what I like too is I like to listen to music that is uplifting and soothing. And so one of my favorite artists is a man by the name of Bill Douglas. His music is considered New Age. He's from Canada, and he's obviously been trained in classical music. He's a pianist, and he has some very uplifting music there.
Yeah, because I don't know how I would get through a day without music. I start the day with music as part of my morning ritual, and I just don't know how I would get through the day without it. So that's a hugely useful recommendation and something that's benefited me. Thank you so much. Like I said, we're going to be showing the links to all of your social media efforts, and I hope that people take advantage of your free programs and from your years of knowledge in your teaching. So thank you again, Lama, for coming on.
Thank you, and I wish all of you good wishes and wish that you will get through this and actually learn and benefit from everything.
Awesome. Thank you again. Thank you.